The iron gate to Kaudara Primary stood higher than the boys who leaned against it each morning, scuffed paint flaking into the dust like old promises. On the first Monday of term, a child named Miriam arrived, in a dress her mother had let down twice and a pair of sandals held by a single thread. She gripped a plastic folder that crinkled like a soft plea. In it lay her last term's report, a vaccination card, and a letter from the ward office stating that the official birth register had burned years ago when a generator coughed and caught. At the gate, the bursar lifted his clipboard and pointed to the line that mattered. PTA levy unpaid, uniform certificate missing, birth record unverified. His finger didn't tremble. He had made this gesture so often it felt like a muscle, not a decision. The boy with the gate key, a guard in a faded khaki shirt, watched the ledger instead of the child. The ledger said no. The gate stayed shut. Miriam's mother, Aisha, counted the notes folded into her headscarf and found they were good enough for flour, but not for signatures. She spoke quietly, because in this city, shouting at an office window could close it forever. Around them, the morning unspooled. A bell clanged, a rooster complained, the assembly song rose and fell like a flag, and the gate did not move. A teacher named Salif came late, bicycle chains squeaking, and saw the small tableau of refusal. He greeted them, took the plastic folder, and read. He saw a neat penmanship in the report. Attendance ticks marching like beads. A comment. Curious? Helps others. He looked at the bursar. The bursar looked at his clipboard. Salif tried the oldest door-opening phrase. Let her sit today. We will sort the papers later. But the gate is never persuaded by words older than itself. The bursar's lips pressed into a careful line, and the guard's key returned to his pocket. The obstacle became a person by standing still. Miriam's classmates craned their necks from the assembly rows to watch what the ledger would do. The bell was struck again, harder. Inside the compound, the anthem started, and outside, a breath caught. In the corner of the gate, the paint was worn away by hands that had pleaded for a decade, a soft, polished crescent that told its own curriculum. On WhatsApp, a parent filmed a few seconds, a child facing a shut gate and a note held up like a passport to an invisible country. The clip jumped from one family group to another. A caption grew teeth. Entry for sale. A mayoral campaign page shared it with a shrug. A market woman who sold yams near the school shook her head and muttered that the gates were learning to read only one language. And it wasn't the alphabet. By noon, the clip had found a journalist who did not waste adjectives. On a small station, with a wavering signal, she recited the ledger lines and said them like a prayer inverted. She asked a question she knew would bruise. If the bell calls children, who gave the gate the right to choose which ones come? The head teacher, summoned, promised that policies are policies and that parents must comply. He showed receipts stamped in purple with an emblem of the PTA's shield. He showed a cabinet of textbooks bought with those levies. He did not show the list of children lingering outside gates across the city's poorer wards, because that list lived only in the braid of rumor and the private shame of mothers who avoided the road by the school. When the assembly ended, Salif returned to the gate with a glass of water. He knelt to Miriam's height and told her the alphabet had waited years to be learned and would wait one more day. This lie tasted like sand. He promised to visit their room near the abattoir to see what papers could be found. Aisha nodded without belief and folded the notes again. Behind the gate, a new song started. Multiplication, rhythmic, and the dust on the road turned gold. The ledger closed with a snap that had more ceremony than the bell. The bursar tugged at his collar in the heat. His phone lit with messages from the district office reminding of targets, of collections, of audits that weighed schools by money gathered rather than children taught. The system was a gate with many hands, none of them owning the hinge. All afternoon the video kept looping. In salons where women plaited hair with practiced lightness, it played. In taxis with cracked dashboards, it played. It reached a small office in the capital where an aide to the leader skimmed public sentiment like a fisherman reading riverskin. The aide, who had long hands and a habit of listing truths in pencil, watched the clip thrice and underlined a phrase on his pad. The gate learns to say no. He typed a message that would tilt the next day, and in the same breath, he looked for the ledger that had turned a child into a line item. The screen on his desk reflected his face next to the paused frame of a little girl at a closed door. The day did not end. It tightened into night, and the forward tug began. The next morning, the city woke early. Kudara's radio hosts spoke over each other in a chorus of indignation that somehow still felt like prayer. Callers sent voice notes, the background noise of cooking oil spitting, goats bleating, a baby sighing, each voice a citizen standing at an invisible gate. A grandmother remembered a year when the school took boys with bare feet and mothers paid in mangoes. She asked when education learned the price of a receipt. A shopkeeper described a nephew turned away because his birth certificate carried a smudge from the rain. In the taxi park, drivers compared scripts. The clerk says, "Come back with the PTA stamp." The guard says, "No stamp, no entry." The head says, "Rules are rules." WhatsApp groups swelled with the same 30 seconds of Miriam's quiet face and the metal spears of the gate. Emojis could not soften the iron. The clip rode on Telegram to a channel that tracked small scandals with large consequences. The heading was simple, an accusation without names. A child holds a folder. A man holds a ledger. Which one gets believed? In the district office, the obstructive official, a man named Baco with a lapel pin that imitated importance, circulated a memo that insisted nothing had happened, or if something did, it could be filed under misunderstanding. He wrote that the PTA levy had been agreed by vote, that the security fee was necessary in these times, that uniform certificates ensured discipline. He cited a clause from a policy manual written 5 governments ago. He CC'd everyone who mattered and not the child. He tidied his desk with motions that looked like authority. A clerk with a calm face and a teacher's son's memory watched him and kept her silence, because in rooms like this, courage had to be spent carefully. Salif bicycled to school again, chain newly oiled as if that would change the physics of doors, and found the gate had learned a new firmness. The bursar didn't meet his eyes. The guard took the key out, turned it, opened a crack for the early arrivals with stamped receipts, then closed it again with that performative clink that sounded like policy. Aicha did not come that day. Pride is a kind of ledge you stand on until your legs shake. Salif asked for a staff meeting to discuss compassion, and received a calendar invitation titled Collections Update. He attended anyway, sat on a plastic chair that complained under him, and heard the head talk about boards, auditors, monthly compliance calls. When he spoke about Miriam's handwriting, the head asked if handwriting purchased chalk or filled the security man's time card. The room smelled of chalk and cynicism. Salif stopped talking and felt, physically, the weight of a system leaning onto a latch. By noon, the aide in the capital, the one who writes truth as if it's a grocery list, sat with Ibrahim. In that office, the furniture did not bully you, and the windows were kept open because the leader believed policies need air. The aide placed his pencil on the same screen-stilled image of a little girl before a barred gate. He spoke in measured lines. The clip, the memos, the district's choice to count receipts rather than children, the letters from parents, the drift of schools into petty toll posts. He did not call it corruption. He called it a ritual of denial that had learned to wear a uniform. Ibrahim listened, chin in hand, the way he listens to people who are old enough to quit believing and have decided not to. He asked softly what the ledger had to say for itself. The aide proposed something that sounded like common sense made into a rule. First bell, open gate. Enroll first, verify later. He called it the first bell protocol in his notes, because names matter and because citizens remember phrases they can chant at a door when memory fails. He added a second line with the calculus of attention. A public board with measures that embarrass indifference. Denials in past 24 hours. Door-to-desk minutes, complaints resolved. He suggested a simple complaint channel, a number printed on the gate itself, that promised a call back within 24 hours, with someone who would pick up and not put down until the child sat at a desk. He drew arrows between ministry budgets and school needs to replace the petty gravity that dragged cash toward pockets. The leader did not nod. He breathed in and out, a slow metronome, because he believes the state must take one breath before every bill it considers, and one breath before every door it closes. While that breath filled the room, the gate at Kudara did what gates do. It kept children out and kept the ledger safe. A city councilor said nothing on radio and asked the head teacher for a favor in a whisper. The PTA chair rehearsed a statement about order and discipline, and parents must do their part. The market woman near the school, whose name was Geneba and whose voice carried like a drum through cloth, told customers this much. A door that stays shut isn't protecting anything, it's hiding fear. On Telegram, a rumor crawled that the leader would come. Someone posted a photo of a convoy that wasn't. Someone else reported a directive that had not yet been written. The chatter crowded out the sound of children reciting. The city leaned forward, chin in hand. The hinge was about to move. It was a Wednesday when the unlikely happened without ceremony. No convoy, no siren, no shouting. A white pickup with dust at its hem rolled to a stop by Kudara Primary, just as the bell stuttered through its first call. Ibrahim stepped out in a pale shirt with sleeves rolled and no entourage save the aide whose pencil was tucked behind his ear, and a small woman from the ministry whose badge had been polished with actual pride. The guard, who had learned how to stand like a gate even when not beside one, straightened. The bursar adjusted his tie, as if ties could become shields. Heads turned. Someone reached for a phone and then thought better. The leader greeted the guard and greeted the gate. He touched the metal, felt its heat, and then let his hand drop to his side. He did not ask for the head teacher. He asked for the ledger. The bursar brought it like an offering. It was heavier than necessary. Receipts fluttered from its clipped corners. Ibrahim didn't sit. He put the ledger on the hood of the pickup as if to cool it. He flipped pages until he found the entry whose video had written it into public memory without a name. Aicha, child Miriam, levy unpaid, uniform certificate lacking, birth record unverified, deny. The word had been underlined in green. He rested his fingers on that line and looked up into a circle of faces that pretended not to know the camera of his gaze. He asked the bursar how often he had written that word this month. The bursar said very little. The leader said he would prefer a number to a feeling. The bursar faltered into the always true sentence, "We follow policy." Behind him, children in the courtyard quieted as if the wind had paused. The aide pointed to the ledger and asked for one thing: read the first sentence of the policy. The bursar's mouth shaped a preface he did not know. The small woman from the ministry, who had the habit of keeping policy folded in her memory like cloth, recited the line aloud: "No child of compulsory age shall be denied entry to a public school." She let the sentence sit in the heat. There followed a paragraph about contributions, a clause about uniformity, a tangle of subclauses that had overgrown the first sentence like vines. The leader ran his palm over the paper as if smoothing a map of a river back to its source. He asked for Miriam. She came from where she had learned not to stand, a corner beneath the neem tree. Her sandals had not improved. She held the same plastic folder, creased now at its spine. He took it and slid the report out as if handling a legal brief. He read the teacher's comment at the bottom. He put the page back and closed the folder with an almost ceremonial care. Then he turned to the guard and asked for the key. The guard felt something pass through him like weather. He took the key from his pocket and offered it with 2 hands. The leader took it, held it not like a weapon but like a tool, and then handed it back. "Open for children first," he said. "For papers later." The guard's arm moved before his doubt could catch it. The gate opened, not wide yet, but wider than the word deny. Miriam looked to her mother, who had arrived breathless. The mother nodded. The child stepped through. Her soles made a sound on the cement that no phone could record. Salif exhaled. The head appeared at last, tie slightly askew, ready with a speech crafted in the language of compliance. Ibrahim met him with the gesture of a man who has come to reorder sequence, not humiliate. "From this bell forward," he said, "you will admit every child whose age and curiosity match these walls. You will enroll first. You will verify later. If fees are due, the ministry will find the path. Your pocket is not that path." He spoke for a minute more, but it felt like the gate had learned a new verb. He did not shout. He did not grind. He framed the policy as a dignity, not a penalty. He called the aide by name and asked for the draft they had prepared. Not a law, a promise, shaped as a rule others could carry in their mouths. The aide unfolded a single page and read the first bell protocol. Treat first, teach first, seat first. Bill later, verify later, document later. The page named a public board that every school must mount by the gate within a week. 3 lines that would change behavior, not through fear, but through shame that belongs to the system, not the poor. Door-to-desk minutes. Denials in the last 24 hours. Complaints resolved. A number was printed at the bottom that would ring in a room staffed by people trained to answer not with explanations, but with solutions. The small woman from the ministry took out pre-printed sheets to pin to the gate, because she had known to bring them. Ibrahim left the rest unsaid for that hour. He walked into the courtyard and greeted the assembly. He said education was not a product. It was a breath the state takes with its people every morning. He spoke of doors in a way that did not embarrass anyone but made the hinge aware of itself. Then he left as he had come, with dust whispering at his cuffs. The head teacher, adrift, watched the aide speak quietly with the bursar and the guard, not to poison wells, but to show them a new path to water. The gate remained open. The ledger on the pickup hood closed gently. The city exhaled. In the radio studios, callers began their messages with a new sentence. "Did you see?" The hinge had moved. The audit would follow. The investigation did not begin with a raid. It began with receipts that didn't add up and the sound of a hotline that kept ringing. In a small office 2 floors above the ministry's front desk, the aide and a team of auditors laid out a map made of paper, ink, and practiced habits. They gathered ledgers from schools that had learned to love the weight of that word deny. They traced each PTA levy from chalk dust to cash drawer to personal mobile money accounts that had been linked to nothing but convenience. They collected memos, some formal, some written on the backs of calendars, that made security fee a talisman that could justify any toll. They asked for the original policy manuals, and a clerk who believed in documents produced a binder with metal rings that had rusted at the edges. In that binder, the first sentence still shone. Around it, a thicket of amendments had grown, some legitimate, others stitched by district officers who found governance easier when it came with a price tag. The truth-telling aide insisted on artifacts that would travel through radio and WhatsApp without breaking. He filmed a 40-second walkthrough of a typical denial process: a child's name on a form, a red stamp, a gate that clicks, a ledger that calls itself the law. He overlaid it with the sentence from the policy that denied denial. He posted a screenshot of the hotline dashboard with 3 measures updated every hour: door-to-desk minutes by school, denials in the last 24 hours, complaints resolved. The numbers were ugly at first. In some schools, door-to-desk hovered above 50 minutes. Denials ticked like a metronome gone mad. Complaints piled. Then, because data criticizes quietly, the bars began to shrink where eyes were watching. Inspectors, 2 by 2, visited schools with a thermos of tea and a sheaf of forms. They weren't police. They were archivists of habit. They asked bursars to show the ledger and explain the revenue streams. They found collection agents appointed by PTA chairs and paid by commission for every levy gathered. They found WhatsApp groups where head teachers wrote sentences that felt like spines bending. We must be strict at the gate. Collections are low. The district is watching. They found a district directive that tied head teachers' performance bonuses to levies gathered, an unmistakable perverse incentive disguised as stewardship. The obstructive official, Baco, had signed it in a neat hand. He had been proud of this measurable thing and deaf to its cost. The inspectors traced the birth certificate requirement back to a tender that had granted a private notarization company exclusive rights to validate old records. The fees were small individually, but added up to a wall when laid brick on brick. The contract's clause numbers were as tidy as its harm. They photographed the corner of the school gate where hands had smoothed paint away. They called mothers and wrote down the cadence of their silence. They met a community voice in the market, Jenipa, who kept a ledger of her own, of children's names and the days they waited. Her pencil did not know policy, but it knew pain. When the team compiled their report, they kept names of mechanisms, not just people. They named the broken device, performance by collection, gate as cashier. They mapped the operators, district officers who measured wrong things, PTA chairs who hired toothy agents, bursars who mistook ledgers for law. They recommended actions proportionate to courage: suspension for Baco pending a hearing, rollback of the notarization monopoly, restitution for families who had receipts for refusals. The aide insisted the report be public, not to shame the poor schools that had been made toll booths, but to shame the river that had flowed into them with bits of poison. The leader read it with that same chin-in-hand stillness, and when he lifted his face, he asked a single question: how do we make the right thing easier than the wrong? The board by Kudera's gate filled with numbers that strangers could read. Door-to-desk minutes fell to 12, then 9. The denials column admitted 3, then 1, then 0. The complaints resolved line learned to love the word yes. Citizens began to send photos of boards from other schools, pride blooming in the unfancy transparency. The hotline log showed a pattern. Calls tended to spike on Mondays and first-of-the-month days, when fees had historically been demanded. The team staffed those hours with people who could make decisions, not just soothe. They wrote a small script for the operators that was embarrassingly simple. Ask the child's name, ask if the gate is open, call the head teacher. Wait on the line until you hear footsteps toward class. They kept those calls. They played them for head teachers in a training that did not humiliate but made them hear the music of an open door. There were those who resisted. A PTA chair argued on radio that order required tolls. He cited the need for security, for uniforms, for commitment. He did not mention the commission he received. A teacher anonymously sent a PDF of a group chat where district officers discussed shifting to development contributions with new stamps. The aide posted this with names redacted and a caption that cut gently: when a gate changes its vocabulary, watch the hinge. The legal office issued a circular that banned commissions tied to gatekeeping. They attached a counter-incentive, a small bonus for schools that kept door-to-desk minutes under 10 for a month and denials at 0, paid from a central fund tied transparently to the education budget. Baco's hearing was scheduled. The room set aside had windows. The investigation did not end with a single dramatic gesture. It ended with receipts returned, a canceled clause, a hotline school day that sounded like chalk. It ended with an instruction to audit again in 90 days, not because there was doubt about the reform, but because habits, like vines, grow back if you stop pruning. The report's final page was a template others could lift. A simple rule printed at the top, 3 public numbers in a box, a complaint channel with a promise, measured in hours, all a note in bold. Ban any incentive that ties an open gate to private gain. At Kudara, the gate paint was retouched. The polished crescent where hands had begged remained as a relic. Children traced it and asked what it meant. Salif told them a story about a door that learned to breathe. The city moved to its next day, carrying this one in its pocket. The reform landed not like thunder, but like a new timetable posted where everyone could see it. The first bell protocol arrived at each school in an envelope stamped with the ministry seal and a sentence inside, so short it was hard to misinterpret. Seat first. Verify later. The rule wore a local name in the yard, breath before bell, because that was easier to say when arguing with a guard. Alongside the sheet came a laminated board to bolt to the gate. It had 3 blank lines under 3 headings that could shame a wall into a window. Door-to-desk minutes, denials, last 24-hour complaints resolved. An instruction card taught how to update it with a marker each day. Bursars rolled their eyes until they realized the marker was more powerful than the stamp. The head teachers grumbled in staff rooms until they saw parents pausing to read the board and then smiling with relief. The guard, key heavy in his palm, learned to watch the board score go down like a heat that finally leaves the room. The money logic had to change, or the gate would learn new words for the same old habit. The ministry announced the abolition of commissions on PTA levies and banned security fees funded at the gate. In their place, a central first bell float was created, a small fund sent monthly to each school based on enrollment to cover true immediate needs. Chalk, a lock, a bulb, a chair, so no one would be tempted to tax a child into a seat. The float was paid not in brown envelopes, but by mobile transfer to a school account visible on the new public dashboard. Parents could see inflows and outflows, not in decimals too small to care about, but in categories that dignified their intelligence: books purchased, repairs, support to families, balance carried. A petty officer could no longer hide behind cash's fog. Complaint channels grew muscle. The number printed on the gate now rang into a small room whose walls had only one decoration: the first bell protocol framed where agents could see it while talking. The team there measured itself with more than sentiment. They set a service level agreement: answer within 3 rings, resolve within 1 school day. Call back the next day to ask if the door stayed open. They kept a paper notebook by each desk because when screens go dark, paper remains a friend. They logged names not to summon shame, but to build stories they could carry back to head teachers when training. The training was not a conference with badges. It was a drill so simple it felt like a joke. 2 teachers would role-play a morning. One would play the gate. One, the child. They would practice breath before bell. Inhale, key turns, exhale, child goes in. They repeated until the movement felt like muscle memory, not mercy. Enforcement gave the reform its teeth, but not its heart. Inspectors were paired with community observers, chosen by lottery from PTA lists. Together, they visited schools without pomp, checked the board, timed the door-to-desk with a second-hand watch, and asked a random child about yesterday. They weren't hunting for gotchas. They were calibrating a culture. They were also carrying a small new tool: a QR code on each gate that parents could scan to see the school's 3 metrics in real time and submit a complaint without calling. The code linked to a dashboard not hidden behind passwords but alive in public. Journalists learned to scrape those lines into stories that praised progress as readily as they had once scolded pain. Consequences arrived where needed. Bako's directive that tied pay to collections was rescinded. His hearing concluded with a suspension and a transfer to a unit that would never again sit near gates. The notarization monopoly was dissolved. New guidelines allowed birth declarations from ward offices and affidavits, a truer reflection of the city's burned files and real lives. Schools that insisted on development contributions were visited twice, then 3 times. On the 3rd visit, a letter removed the head's signature authority for a season. But the reform's genius ran elsewhere. It made the right thing easy. It put chalk in storerooms without the choreography of shame. It let a child sit and listen to multiplication without her mother running home for coins. Ibrahim kept his language spare. In a short address aired on the same station that first described Miriam's folder, he said, "Education is a door, not a toll gate. It is the state's breath taken with the people. Each day the bell rings. He thanked guards and bursars not because they had been blameless, but because they had chosen, most of them, to turn the key even when the ledger's muscle twitched in their hands. He spoke of numbers not as weapons, but as mirrors. He showed the first week's dashboard, the door-to-desk falling toward 10 like a stone toward earth, denials receding like a tide, complaints answered with the dignity of a call returned. He did not mention Miriam by name. He did not make her a mascot. He allowed her to become what she had asked to be the first morning, a student. In staff rooms, the talk shifted. At first, teachers rolled their eyes at the board, calling it a performance. Then they began to compete, good-natured and practical, about whose line fell fastest. Salif found that he could spend less time mediating at the gate and more time explaining the quiet miracle of reading. The PTA chair discovered that community gave freely when asked with respect in a transparent ledger. Jeneba at the market kept her private list of names, but now it read differently. She wrote down children who had returned, how quickly who needed a pencil, not a permit. She stopped warning customers about the gates and started reminding them to read the boards when they passed. The city learned a new habit, and that habit was the boredom of a gate that each morning simply opened. Months later, the novelty thinned, as all good news should. The gate at Kudara Primary had been repainted the color of early light. The polished crescent where hands once pleaded remained, not as a warning, but as a relic children traced with the same curiosity they brought to maps. The board beside the gate still listed its 3 lines. Door-to-desk minutes hovered at 7, then 6. Denials in the last 24 hours stayed mostly at 0. Complaints resolved ticked forward with a steady yes. People stopped taking photos of the board because it no longer surprised them. Comfort is quiet. That was the point. Inside, the bell called and found no argument. The guard's key lived in his pocket but came out now without drama. He learned to time the opening with the clapper's second breath. He would smile to himself sometimes, a man who had been a symbol of refusal and had chosen, in a small way, to become a servant of welcome. Miriam took her seat each morning in a room where the windows stuck on rainy days and the chalk stained your fingers, but the lessons arrived with a consistency that felt like weather. She learned the story of a river that made the city possible, of numbers that grow by rules as predictable as sunrise, of a poem that described a door and meant more than doors. Salif taught with a lightness he hadn't felt in years, his voice building small bridges across the gaps that hunger and worry cut into children's attention. He still carried his bicycle lock in his bag, because habits persist, but he no longer used it as often since he reached school early to greet the youngest at the gate. He had become, without noticing, a keeper of the board, the man who wrote the new number each afternoon before riding home. In the district office, the desk that once held a memo about collections now held a schedule for school visits that paired officials with parents. Paco had been moved elsewhere and taught a lesson he did not request, that metrics behave like children. They grow in the direction you praise. The aide kept his pencil behind his ear and added notes to the monthly culture check. He visited a school on the city's far edge where an elderly head teacher once insisted on a discipline fee and now stood under the board explaining to a grandmother how complaints worked. The aide wrote in his notebook that culture becomes stable when the rule is so simple you can explain it while passing through a doorway. He recommended that the breath before bell principle be extended to other gates, clinics, registry offices, bus depots. Inside the ministry, a draft circulated quietly with a new template replacing fees at thresholds with floats and dashboards, sketched in the handwriting of a man who trusted plain words. The market hummed as ever. Jeneba sold yams and counted the days to the harvest. She kept still a ledger, but this one listed not denials but small victories. 2 brothers, whose mother cut hair under a corrugated awning, now reading road signs aloud to each other. A girl who took the long way around the school for years, now cutting straight past the gate, bored by its openness. She told anyone who would stand long enough to listen that good systems are like good pots. You forget about them until they spill. She had once been the city's informal ombudsman. Now she mainly listened, nodded, and said, "It's working," which is a phrase as radical as any protest when told softly over scales. Ibrahim visited less. That was by design. He believed reform only sticks when the author disappears from the footnotes. He sent others. He read the dashboards at night with the same attention he used on conflict briefings because peace needs vigilance too. When a school's denials line flickered above 0 for reasons plausible and human, a flood, a teacher ill, he did not rush to scold. He called the head and asked what was needed to return the board to its dull excellence. He spoke on radio now and then in the old spare tone. If you meet a gate that says no to a child, call this number, read this rule, stand there and breathe while we walk you through the hinge. He did not perform shock. He performed maintenance. There were attempts to bend the rule into new shapes. A PTA chair in another ward tried to create a uniform assurance that sounded helpful and behaved like a toll. The QR code captured the deviation, and the next morning's meeting turned it into a lesson, not a scandal. The notarization company that lost its monopoly rebranded, offering seminars on citizen documentation that taught families how to claim their names without paying for the privilege. Newspapers found less to be angry about, and paradoxically, more to write. Profiles of guards turned greeters. Interviews with mothers who had learned the comfort of a routine. Quietly furious essays about how long it took to make the obvious official. The reform had become ordinary. Ordinary is the home of justice. On the anniversary of the first Bell Protocol, someone in the ministry suggested a ceremony. The aide shook his head. Instead, they issued a one-page note to schools. Remember, seat first. Verify later. If in doubt, open the door and call us. A child stuck a hand under the gate as a game, the way children test the world's edges. The metal was just metal now, not a script. The bell rang. Breath came. A mother walked past without stopping, because the day no longer required her to plead. In the far wards, other gates imitated Kudara, not by order, but by envy of ease. At clinics, nurses began to whisper a sibling phrase. Treat first, bill later. And by the time anyone issued a protocol, it had already settled into muscle. Miriam finished the year with a report card folded not as a passport, but as a promise. Her mother kept it in a jar near the window where she stored small coins and bigger hopes. The city kept moving. Buses complaining, vendors singing prices, radios telling everyone what everyone already knew. The board still read 0. The story had ended the way it should, with a hinge that learned a better habit, a ledger that remembered its first sentence, and a door that was no longer a character, but a background object doing the most radical thing a public object can do, its job.